Hi, and welcome back to the Noble Global Dialogue series, whereas this week we'll be talking about healing and what that really looks and feels like following an experience of domestic abuse. I am really chuffed to be able to welcome our brilliant guest for this conversation. One whom is Tommy, who's pardon me, is an award-winning author, entrepreneur, and leader in the movement to end domestic violence. And Bibi, who's a social worker and the author of No Ordinary Love and a domestic violence survivor herself. I think one of the things to start off with and sort of saying is that when we started this series, we were very much focused on exploring the different stages within a relationship and really unpicking what that looked and felt like with regards to domestic abuse and really trying to unpick what some of those red flags could be. And we started off by looking in the early dating stage. We spent a little bit of time looking at that, the moment when you move from dating into sort of a getting to know each other better. Perhaps you're living together, perhaps you weren't. We've spent some time talking about the experiences of children whom are living in a home where the domestic abuse is happening. We then spend some time looking at the impact of economic abuse and how subtle and violating and how long lasting that impact can be. And then in our last session, we spent a moment to really unpick and trying to understand who the perpetrator of domestic abuse, domestic violence is. We spend the time really sort of saying to ourselves and acknowledging that nobody falls in love with an aggressive, violent, abusive person, and that we do fall in love with people who are charismatic and engaging and actually are incredibly invested in getting to know us. And so, the impact of that sort of trauma of who you thought you were with, who they then turn out to be, was one element we really spent some time talking about. And I think we can't end this series or we can't finish this series without really digging into what does recovery look like. And obviously, when we talk about recovery, it's a big, big statement, and healing is different for each person and is very underpinned by so many factors. Part of that is what resources you have, you have access to. Are you economically independent? What type of support you have from friends, family members around you, but also what your experience was in a whole. So today we're really sort of going to really dig into what healing could look like and sort of perhaps answer some of those questions that you've been asking us over the past 6 months, which are things around: when can I start a new relationship? What should I do when I start a new relationship? How much of myself should I disclose? How much of myself should I hold back? So hopefully through our discussion today, we'll be able to answer some of those. But to start with, and I think this is the most important thing in a way, is that let's really try and understand what healing means and what it can mean to different people. So Toby, I'm going to start with you. First question, first opportunity to sort of really dig into that. When we talk about healing, it's a big concept, big statement, but often that's underpinned by so many emotional and practical challenges that survivors will face. Should we take a moment and really sort of think about what that looks and feels like? What are the common emotional or practical challenges that survivors may face when thinking about recovery and healing from experiencing a domestic abuse within a relationship?
hmm So first, let me just say I am a thriving domestic violence survivor, and my personal mission is to normalize the conversation and not the behavior. And I share that up front, especially in this conversation, because we're talking about healing. What does healing look like? What does healing feel like? And when you think about someone on a journey and really identifying this space of healing, I think it's important for us to emphasize that everybody's journey, it looks different, it feels different. When I was in my domestic violence relationship, I was in high school,
Mhm.
and a lot of what I was experiencing was par of the course for what I had witnessed growing up. And so for me, I was experiencing love the way that love was demonstrated to me. And so coming on the other side of that, what I felt strange. It felt abnormal because it was not the normal for what I knew love to be. And so I think it's important for people to understand, one, what their situation is, and take time to evaluate how they were defining love to begin with. Because if you were defining love a specific way, and then you were experiencing it based off of what you thought love was, that felt right, that felt normal. And so really understanding if your definition was warped as a result of your upbringing or an experience that you had, you got to first really understand, what does love feel like? And for me, when I talk about this with other survivors and victims of domestic violence, love should not make you afraid. And when fear is present, then you know that this love is not authentic, it's not real, because real love does not hurt intentionally, and it should not make you afraid.
Wow, that you so many incredibly good points that you've made there. And I think that nugget of what you grew up with and what you saw is really, imperative for creating that framework, and how many of us are influenced by what we see in our own homes, but also
Mhm.
what we see in the media and what we're taught through music and all those pieces about what love is. And I think one of the pieces which I found really interesting is the mixture between jealousy, possessiveness, and how we can equate that to being more loved, and how that can be so intertwined in our experiences of relationships. Bibi, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think unlike Tommy, I had a kind of the opposite experience. I had not lived that. I had not witnessed that, but I was also young, so I didn't know what love should look like either. And so it felt extra confusing. It felt like I was the only person in the world who was experiencing this. And when you have an abuser who is minimizing your experience or denying it, then that can, throw you off too. The possessiveness and the jealousness, I didn't experience that in the beginning, but it was definitely that, as you said earlier, hyper focus on me and figuring out what I needed and what I wanted and giving all of that to me. And so that was very confusing because that is something I didn't have or I didn't feel I had in my family of origin. It was very different from everybody else. I wanted the words of affirmation, and I felt like I came from a family that had no feelings, whereas I had all the feelings. And so when I matched with somebody who was going to give me everything that I felt I never
Mhm.
had, that was I thought that's what love was because it's what I had been seeking for my whole life up until then.
Mean, again, some incredibly interesting insights. I think you're absolutely right about that piece of, do we seek out things that we have missed in our life, in our affection. If we are a very affectionate person and we're looking for more affection, we are seeking that out, and then that can feel right and can feel good. I suppose that, we speak about that next moment that you've put your faith and your trust in this person, and that you've now what you thought was love. And now you've started to unpick and identify that it isn't healthy love.
Mm.
How, in these sort of early stages, I think I'll jump in for you to answer this one, Tommy, if you can, is that, when we talk about healthy relationships, what are some of the key things that we'd identify that make us feel like this is good love, this is healthy love?
I think it's extremely important for when we're talking about what is healthy love is, and I keep going back to this because if you don't have a barometer
Mhm.
for what's healthy and what's unhealthy, and you never take the time to understand the unhealthy aspects of love, then you're in trouble to begin with. Bibi and I pointed out what we were looking for. We were looking for validation for what we believed love to be. The very first time that I was hit in a relationship, I thought, boy, he really loves me, because that is what I saw love to be. And so when I started really healing and coming on the other side of things, what I knew was not um, what was a flag that I needed to be mindful of is, if someone is asserting their authority over me to control me and to exude their power over me, then that is problematic. So what should I be looking for? The opposite space of that. I'm looking for somebody who is considerate and kind, and that when I have thoughts and opinions, when I have contributions to bring forward, that not only are we considering their perspective, but my perspective. And then we're coming to this space where we can come into agreement with the position we're moving in. And so when you understand the opposite of what is not healthy, then you can identify what is healthy. And so that is the very first place I would start is really mapping that out for yourself. So you got to understand you. You got to know what's driving you and what is the foundation of the love that you've been looking for, so that now you can shift your perspective, open up your eyes for a different view, and really look for, but what is the love that I deserve? What is the love that is going to nurture me and care for me? The love that is going to help me to grow and bring out the best in me. And that is where you're able to identify what real healthy, good love feels like.
Really true. So it's, and I do, echo your point about actually that spending the time with you and understanding what you need is crucial. And that all of us need different things at different moments in our lives, and our partners, we should be able, in a healthy relationship, be able to express that. What are your thoughts about that?
Lindsay, may I just add one
Oh, of
more
course.
thing? Um, because we shouldn't be looking to other people
Mhm.
to give us what we need. That's
Mhm.
that when you're talking about identifying, what does Tommy, what does BB, what does Lindsay, what do we require for ourselves in order for us to be thriving women in our world, in our communities, in our home, or wherever we are? If we're looking to a relationship to validate that, to confirm that, to affirm that, then we have to reposition even our thinking there, because understanding who you are before you engage in a relationship, it establishes your personal standard. And so when the person you're in a relationship with is not lining up with that, that's a flag. Because now you have to decide, am I going to compromise what my values are, what I need to thrive? Am I going to set those things aside just to be in a relationship looking for this person to be my all in all, when it first starts with us as the individual?
Yeah, I 100 bazillion, gazillion percent agree with you. It's that work that we need to do with ourselves. And the thing that sort of flashes for me is that what that requires is us to be able to gift ourselves time and gift ourselves
Mhm.
reflection and understanding and a little bit of forgiveness for our pre-assumed, assumptions about ourselves. BB, what are your thoughts?
I would say two things that were sticking out for me. The first is that I totally agree with Tommy a bazillion percent. But one thing came to mind for me, and it was that I really struggled for a long time after I was physically free of him, I say, because I wasn't emotionally, psychologically free for still really sometimes, was that what I was comparing it to were these ups and downs. And for a really long time, I was confusing safety and security with boredom. I was confused because it was so meh. It felt like it was flatlining. I questioned, do I really like this person? Does this person really like me? And I really had to work on realizing that no, 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 this is a good thing. This is the opposite. It's a good thing. It's safety, security. Just being able to sit with someone in silence or sit with someone with no drama is a gift. And so that was one of the hardest things for me moving forward in new relationships eventually, was that piece. And to back up what Tommy said about what we need to do for ourselves and give to ourselves, that's actually part of how I started the initial part of my healing process. Was I didn't feel like I didn't understand what I'd gone through, first and foremost. I needed to figure that out for myself first, try to believe myself first, understand it first, unpack it first. And what I ended up doing was I called them scenes because I wrote a book. So I wrote all the scenes of the domestic violence. I externalized that part of myself because it was too hard to believe that I had been through that. So I called her Katie and I wrote scenes about her. And eventually I was to her what I needed then. I told her what I needed to hear then. So I essentially was like therapizing myself in a way and talking to a younger version of me, and giving her, figuring out together, I guess, what we needed, what we deserved, what we um, needed to do and wanted moving forward.
You so much for sharing that. What I hear from both of you, and I'd really like if we can spend a minute just pausing on it, is that in order to start the healing process, we need time. And we need to have the space and the security to do that. But as we know, when you're leaving in those first, the point of separation, the risk to you is significantly higher if you're leaving an abusive relationship. Your ability to think of yourself, your emotional, your state, that is often hampered by navigating the craziness of those practical pieces about finding accommodation, becoming economically independent, and how some of those challenges that you have to navigate can trigger and push you back into that state. For example, if you're in and out of a family court situation, navigating child custody, how the abusive person can perpetuate that abuse, even though what seems to everyone around you is you're physically separated. But like you say so eloquently, Bibi, that actually where you are physically and where you are emotionally and mentally are two different things. So should we spend a minute just really digging into some of those challenges that you can face on that journey? Tommy, would you like to start?
Sure. So I just recently, a week and a half ago, I went and had a physical exam. And part of the physical exam was a hearing test. And when she was writing down the marks of when I was raising my hand from my right ear to my left ear, I was hearing less in my right ear. And immediately it was the reminder of the blunt force trauma that I experienced on the right side of my head when my abuser was hitting me in my ear. And so now high school, my entire time in high school, and I'm 50 years old now at a physical. And in that moment, that piece of my movie of the abuse started playing in my mind. Now I'm at a space where I'm not going to sit in it. As part of your healing, you define and you work out ways so that you're able to move past it quicker than you were able to do it before, but you still have the memories. You still will have visuals when you're, just say if I'm in my hometown of Trenton, New Jersey, and I drive down the road where the bridge is, where he tried to throw me off the bridge, immediately the movie starts to play in my mind. And it doesn't matter that I'm thriving. It doesn't matter that I'm happily married with 5 kids, 10 grandchildren, all of that stuff. Those are amazing aspects of my life, but I can't erase my experiences. I may heal and move forward from those experiences, but I will always remember. And I believe that that is one of the most challenging parts of healing. That is one of the most challenging parts of the journey, is because we have to be able to reel ourselves back in so that when we are experiencing the emotions, the feelings, if there was financial abuse involved, you can be in a new relationship and all of a sudden it could be a really good decision for the family for us not to do this. And so the answer may be, we shouldn't spend this money on that, or I don't want you to spend the money on that because of the budget. And then you're feeling like they're trying to control me financially, like it was in the other situation. And so we have all of these things that, little fires that come up, that if we don't put them out, and we don't extinguish them with the truth about the circumstances we're in, then it can consume us, and it can really cause us to go to a space that we don't deserve to dwell in, because we're moving in the space of healing now.
That's, so put so well. I mean, I think the interesting thing for those that are in, supporting victim survivors, or those that are friends and family members, that the assumption that can often be made is that, okay, you've left the abusive relationship, it's 5 years on, you've got a lovely home, you're in a new relationship. Why are you upset about something that happened so many years ago? But actually, you're absolutely right. It's those triggering moments, and those triggering moments can be visceral. You can experience them physiologically. You can have the sensations in your skin, and that can be shaking. And if those around you don't respond how you need them to respond, that can be really tough too. But I really, appreciate what you're saying about acknowledging that and thinking of your own roots, how you would move through it. What are your thoughts, Bibi?
100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. For me, that's why it was essential for me to structure my book the way that I did. I feel like I've heard about, read about, know people who share their experiences when they're in a domestic violence situation. But then we don't hear a lot about following that through. Like when you think about, longitudinal studies and you're following people along their life, we don't hear about that. And so I structured my book very intentionally to have one character who is in the thick of it, one character who's 10 years out, and a third character who's 20 years out. And it was really important to me to show the triggers through all of those characters, to show the five senses and how they were being triggered. Maybe not all the time, maybe not every day, but how it was still showing up for those women. And more than that, showing also some hope that at each stage, you're dealing with a more healed version of yourself. So the way that you're reacting or responding or handling or managing those triggers is very different. And it might be so slight that we don't notice it, but it's happening. There is growth, there is healing in that, even if we can't put a finger on it. It's kind of like the stages of grief, right? There's different stages and we can bounce in and out of different ones at different times. We can be really good for a long time and then bam, something happens and we're right back in it. And speaking of grief, I think that that's something that's not often talked about in healing either. My abuser, there were many amazing things about him and we had many amazing times. And I often hear um, survivors, victims, thrivers talking about like a 90-10 or pick whatever percentage works for you. For me, I always talked about the 90-10. 90% of the relationship, I felt like it was a dream. It was a honeymoon. It was the most amazing thing I ever could have wanted or wished for. But the 10% was potentially fatal, numerous times. And so I still had to grieve that 90%. I had to come to terms with these two very different people, and I had to grieve him. And it wasn't just him, it was, I felt sorry for him a lot of the time. I felt defensive of him sometimes. I felt sad. I mean, that was a really confusing thing to come to terms with. And I feel like a lot of the people, once I did start sharing, which took a long time, like we're talking years, 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 like decade. Once I did start sharing, I feel like that's the one part that my family and friends and loved ones like really couldn't grasp. They really couldn't understand. And that's where I felt most alone. So
That is so, so interesting. And I think you're absolutely right. There is this real misconception that once you leave an abusive relationship and you look back, you're grateful for being away from it. But actually, we talk about who you met when you first got together. You had dreams, you had hopes, you had aspirations. And in some ways, you have to take that relationship to the funeral to grieve what it was. Tommy, what are your thoughts?
It's definitely a space where it's not talked about a lot. And it's one of those spaces where, like BB mentioned, you can feel isolated because it's considered like crazy talk. This person harmed you. This person almost killed you. And yet here you are still considering that there was any aspect of them that was a good person. And I know it can be really challenging, especially when you're in adult abusive relationships and there are a circle of friends where everyone got together and you all hung out, you vacationed together, you had spent the holidays together. And then all of a sudden, that relationship no longer exists for you, but you see the pictures on social media, you hear the conversations where people are talking about the gatherings, and that person was there, and that was also your friend group. So now you feel like you're missing out on a life, the part of the life that BB is talking about that you loved, that you enjoyed. And so just understanding that it's an emotional roller coaster, the healing process. And then it does get to a place where you understand and you recognize, I'd rather live in the space of being out of that relationship 100% of the times than experiencing any good aspect of it for any percentage of a time, because I'm worthy of a life that feels safe, that feels like love, and is not going to harm me, or where I got to think about, am I going to survive to the next day?
It's an interesting sort of conundrum in some ways because you have you have a whole set of memories. And if you've had children together, or if you've been, like you were saying, Tommy, that you spent high school together, you have those moments which, when you think back to different points which were positive, but actually you have this other piece underneath it where you're remembering the others, the other experiences. And that balance inside of you can be incredibly difficult to manage. And I suppose the other piece is that you have friends, and like you mentioned so well, that who may remember those things completely differently to how you remember.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that Christmas that you all turned up at your parents' house, and you were sort of working on eggshells, making sure everything was safe and there wasn't anything going to happen. Other family members could have remembered it as the best Christmas ever, and they may recall how much fun it was. And that sort of mixture between your experience and theirs can be quite difficult to manage. So sort of, we've had a bit of a chat in a way about what healing can look like, and that it's different for different people. We know that so many things impact healing. The ability to access a talking therapist, for one, for those that can afford it or can have the time out from work to achieve those sessions. Also, knowing that when you have those sessions, that you have other parts of your life that are practically, and around, you have accommodation, you have an income that you're feeling, that you're able to achieve, and that you have some of that. So that moment of having stability can enable and promote healing. But also we know that there are huge implications about trust and what that looks like going forward. So I just want to spend a minute really to talk about that moment between, I've experienced a domestic abuse in a relationship, I've met somebody new, and I feel ready to start letting this person in my life. What does that look and feel like? And are there any sort of suggestions that you can make? I know, Tommy, you mentioned earlier about knowing yourself and setting your own set of boundaries, but what are your thoughts?
So just in full transparency, when I'm a loving person, I'm full of love and I have a lot of love to give. And when I met my husband, now of 31 plus years, when I first got into that relationship, I was a mess because I had learned a way to love. I was young. Had no therapy. I didn't have anyone to talk me through what a healthy relationship looks like and the things that I should have as an expectation. I was extremely aggressive. And my husband grew up in a home where he witnessed abuse. And so I'm coming towards him and saying, no, this is love. Why aren't you, wanting to provoke him to engage me because you don't love me if you're not doing that? It took me decades before I got into therapy to really start to understand that I had to move differently in my own relationship so that I could experience not only for his benefit, but for me. And just to be clear, I was not in a relationship for decades, being a wild woman and being an aggressor in the relationship. That was extremely short-lived, maybe like a week, because I realized, and for the wrong reasons, I stopped. I realized that if I did that, then it was pushing him away. So it was still me wanting to protect the person I was in a relationship with. It wasn't about, I needed to understand that love should show up differently for me. It was, oh gosh, I got to make sure I'm protecting him, and this hurts him. I don't want to hurt him. So then it caused me to move through my marriage bit of a mute and not expressing and sharing the things that concerned me, because I didn't want to do anything that would disrupt our relationship. And so I had to learn. The reason why I went to therapy, I didn't even realize it was as a result of the way I experienced an abusive relationship and some of the things I experienced growing up. I did it because I could no longer be in a relationship where my voice wasn't present. And so there is so much to unpack in everyone's journey that has experienced an abusive relationship. But we have to understand and be able to know that these things even exist, that as we're moving into relationships, the challenges that we're experiencing, there's this undercurrent that exists in relationships when you have come from abusive situations. And some people have experienced multiple abusive relationships. And so being able to have resources, I was fortunate. I had resources to go to therapy. But like you said, Lindsay, that is not always the case for people. Or it may not be family culture to go to get therapy. It could be a taboo because now you're not talking about an abusive relationship. You're talking about something is mentally wrong with you. Why do you need to go to a therapist? Or it may be that they push them towards their religion, and the religion may support relationships where a man has dominance, and then it's you need to stay, you need to submit to this, you need to allow for this to be because this person has authority over you. So there's so many aspects of understanding that free resources are imperative. Access to services are imperative. That's why local organizations and communities are critical for the survival of not only the victims, but also their children, the families of those. Being able to access those resources are imperative. And where there are no resources, where there are no buildings and safe spaces, people just continue to suffer in silence.
No, you're absolutely right. I just want to reflect back on something you said, which I thought is incredibly interesting. And you mentioned how in your your early stages of your relationship that you would identify that you were being aggressive. And I find that term really interesting to sort of unpack because we know that in order for us to feel safe and secure, we need to have boundaries that we put in place. And those boundaries are always, shiftable by whomever because people will always try and challenge them. And in some ways, if you've never had the support in being able to stand true to those boundaries, all of us can become really strict and strong with them. So I thought it was a really, really interesting way to say that actually that felt like that for you in that time, because I know that there are many times where if your boundary has been challenged, you will become stricter and stronger at it. And in doing that you'll become fiercer in your response to somebody not crossing that boundary. So I thought that was really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's often misunderstood in a way, about that reinforcing. And when we're so used to always thinking of the other person and accommodating somebody else, that challenge of going, this is what is my boundary in this space, can be a difficult one to push forward.
I'm sorry, it had froze a little bit. So I just want to make sure we're speaking about the aggression, the terminology that I use. So as a point of clarifying, boundary setting and being aggressive to inflict harm are different. I can be strong and firm in my boundary setting. I have my non-negotiables in all of my relationships, whether that's personal or professional. I have non-negotiables. But when I am being aggressive to inflict harm or aggressive to be confrontational, and confrontation doesn't have to be harmful. Confrontation doesn't have to amount to abuse. But when the end result that I'm looking to achieve, or the person is looking to achieve, is to inflict harm with words, to inflict harm with physical aggression, to inflict harm with control, and, holding on and restricting access and use to something, that type of aggression is abusive. And so I knew that in my relationship, coming into my relationship with my husband, my aggressiveness was motivated by what I thought love was, that in order for love to be love, it required some sense of harm. It required some sense of control. And that is not, in a healthy relationship, I don't have to feel like I got to lock down on situations to be in control, or I have to physically persuade someone to get the result that I want, or withhold or manipulate to get the things that I want. So when I was talking about aggression, that's the type of aggression that I was talking about. And it's important to note, by nature, my personality is naturally aggressive. So I had to understand the difference between those two, because my aggression, when it shows up in a healthy form, has been extremely beneficial for me. But I had an aspect of this gifting of aggression that was out of control. And it had, in that instance, it was like a weapon formed against my own self that was not working properly.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I think I was in another space thinking about that moment where people will be questioning you and then you're interpreting yourself because you've never been able to be supported in your affirmation of your boundaries. But thank you so much for explaining that more. I'm a little bit lost on what you were saying. So my apologies for that. Okay. So I suppose we've spoken about all of this, and I really want to go back to that moment of you're starting this new relationship. You like somebody, you've had this space and this time. What are some of the things that you would consider doing in order to embark on it in a way that where you felt it was healthy? Bibi, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, can you please? I don't really understand the question. Can you say?
Sorry about that. No, I'm saying, so if, at that moment that you feel ready to move into a new relationship, and you've met somebody potentially, or you're starting to think about going out there to meet somebody. It might be via dating, it might be through a friend or a family member. What are some of the things that you will be, you would consider are important for the person starting
Oh,
the journey?
I mean, I think patience and understanding. I really needed to find somebody who didn't take up as much space as my ex did, somebody who was a little bit more, calm's not the right word, but less. But that's in a positive way, I mean it. I also, I struggled. I'm kind of connecting your question to what we were just talking about because I had something to say about that and I think I can connect them. But I really struggled because I was a runner. And so when a situation would come up with dating somebody new and it was in a healthy way and there was any sort of healthy conflict or just not even conflict, just a disagreement, I was a runner. The first time I actually moved out of the province because I thought, oh my goodness, this is getting scary. I'm going to break it off and I can't trust that breaking it off means it's done. So I also have to move out of the province and essentially ghost myself. That moved on to another relationship where well, multiple relationships, I guess, where I would actually pack up my cats, because that's something that my abuser used against me, and go to my car and spend the night in my car overnight, sometimes in the winter. I live in Canada, for everyone who doesn't know that, and it gets cold. And I would spend the night in my car, sometimes with it running all night to be warm. And so, for me, it was just somebody who could be patient, could be understanding, could try to play the role of a detective to try to figure out what was behind my behavior. What was the need that I had that was behind this behavior. Um, I remember the first person that I was with that didn't really respond much at all to that. He would just check back in with me every 10 or 15 minutes or so just to see that I was okay, which I appreciated, but I didn't understand why he wasn't coming at me and trying to solve the problem and reacting to me trying to leave all the time, to escape all the time. He just checked in and he was patient. And eventually, I learned that for me in relationships, it was important that at least to some degree, my partner knew a little bit about what I had been through because it explained a lot of my behavior. And then, of course, I had to be responsible for my behavior and changing that and connecting the dots and being like, okay, I'm responding this way or reacting this way because of this. That's not the situation I'm in right now. I'm safe right now. I'm okay right now. And I need to react or behave differently. So I think back to your question this time is just more about somebody who is patient, somebody who to me took up less space and allowed me to have some space and allowed me to have my feelings, and somebody who was willing to figure it out with me to try to unpack all of that and be like, what just happened and why? Where did that come from? And by the way, you're not there anymore. You're here with me now and you're safe and you're okay and I love you and we'll work through this.
Interesting. What are your thoughts, Tommy? Thank you for that, Bibi. Really, really interesting, really insightful.
When moving into or considering going into a relationship, I believe it's important to understand when to really evaluate, do I want to go further? Because every relationship and every engagement doesn't require you to know all the details. That's part of the courting process where you might have a couple of dates and say, this guy's just personality wise, or, this girl, she's not for me. And so it's really just kind of understanding, how do you want to move forward, and where's that point in the relationship where you want to ask some critical questions so that you can get some answers. Like an example, I would want to know how you resolve conflict.
Mhm.
I would want to know, what is your relationship like with your mom? Like, there's some really practical questions you can ask in a relationship, but in order to know what's important to you, I believe you need to like write that out for yourself. How do I want to feel in a relationship? What don't I want to feel in a relationship? What's important to me in a relationship? So that way you're establishing the things that matter to you. And so when you're having these conversations and you're engaging, and building your questions so you can get more information, okay, this aligns with what I'm looking for. This does not align with what I'm looking for. We have to have such a good gauge about who we are as people and what we want and what we desire. And just speaking from the perspective of a woman, a lot of times we don't know that about ourselves because we invest so much in other people. You don't even have to be in a relationship, and you're investing in the people in your community. You're investing in, the people at your job. You're investing in if you're married, you're investing in your spouse and your children. And we don't take the time to really consider what we like, what we love, what we don't like. And so if you have all of these unanswered questions about yourself, it'll be really difficult to be able to identify in another person if this works for you or not. So I know I keep going back to this place, but I cannot emphasize it enough. You got to get to know you so that you can engage in a relationship that you're considering, and that you have a starting point of, this works for me and this doesn't.
Mhm. I think I really appreciate you keep going back to that space, because it seems like the space that we don't spend enough time in. I mean, if you've been in a relationship where you've experienced coercive and controlling behavior or gaslighting, it's guaranteed that you're walking away from that relationship really sort of trying from the beginning to reaffirm what you like, who you are, and reestablish your true sense of reality, because that's been damaged and harmed by this abusive person. And so actually taking that time out and asking yourself, and I loved the way that you placed those three questions there, quite simple questions, but quite ones that you have to dig into. What do I want is a hard question to answer if you've
Mm-hmm.
never had the space to decide what you want. What do I like is a completely different question, but also incredibly difficult to answer. So I think, yeah, I really appreciate that that's the starting point. Who are you? What do you want? And what does that look like? And I suppose then the next piece really is, and BB, perhaps you can share this, is when and how much of yourself do you share with somebody that you've just met? Bearing in mind that we do all of this talking about prevention and identifying red flags, and we know those people who are choosing to be abusive will specifically seek out people who have experienced other forms of abuse in their relationships, and they will use that as an opportunity to find out more information, dig deeper, and potentially put in the tool. How do we balance knowing that these people exist and being true to ourselves in when we can share about ourselves?
I mean, I think for me, it really came down to waiting until I could trust myself again. I could trust
Mm-hmm.
my feelings, I could trust my gut, I could see a behavior in somebody else and believe it. Do you know what I mean? To not want to try to rescue or save or fix somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, it was really learning how to trust myself again, and what felt right in the moment. Going really slow, not giving too much right off the bat, and kind of also matching what was given. I'm an oversharer by nature, and um, I remember like in my abusive relationship, it was a lot about me and not a lot about him. There wasn't a lot of his friends or his family or his upbringing, unless it was used to confuse me or harm me or make me feel guilty. It was a lot of focus on me, and who doesn't like talking about themselves, right? And so that felt good that someone was so interested, but you have to match it. Somebody should be sharing as much as they're asking is what I think. And so just going slow and keeping pace with the other person and never sharing anything, trusting your gut goes on what you're sharing too. If it doesn't feel right or if it doesn't feel like you know how the other person might respond or you're wondering, then it's not the right time. It should come out naturally and it should feel good. And also just to pay attention to the response as well, right?
So what do you mean by pay attention to the response?
Well, like depending on how somebody responds to information that you're giving can kind of show where they're at. So, for example, and this is far long ahead, I'm talking, a decade out. When I met my husband, my current husband, we've been together 9.5 years now, almost 9.5 years. I had to move slow with what he could learn about me. He was the opposite of me. He was very guarded, didn't want to share a lot. And so then that made me hold back based on what I just said to you, kind of match where the person's at. And I would just be really careful to, when I would share something with him, that if he didn't seem ready to try to understand it or ready to ask more questions about it or ready to, go deeper into conversation about it, then that was something that I would table for later and to not push somebody else to get somewhere before they're ready to be there. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much for elaborating, and I think the audience members will really appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to add on that, Tommy?
Um, what I want to add is not necessarily answering the question. I just would really like for everyone that has an opportunity to listen to this conversation who may have experienced an abusive relationship that you don't miss out on love because you think your love is broken. And so
Mm,
you spend so much time pulling away and retracting from life and not willing to engage in relationships because you put fault and blame on yourself that the relationship was abusive because something you did. And I think it's really important for us to move from that space and understanding that our love is not broken. And that as we get to learn of ourselves, as we get to really understand what is abuse, I know there's a lot of terminology that is used to define abuse in the space. And there's a lot of terminology where you would say it and people would say, what is that? I have no idea what that is because it's very, it's part of the industry, if you will. So we have terminology we use, but when you're in real life, that terminology is not being used. So being able to understand those aspects, how abuse would show up in your life so that you can move forward, releasing those things, but really being willing to jump into love because we're all worthy of real love.
mhm.
I think that's
And to that point, I always say like be boundaried. That's important. That's an essential skill that we have to have, but don't be closed off. I always say that you will never, well, lots of people say you'll never win the lottery if you don't play. And I never take that to mean like the lottery of money. I've always meant that the lottery of love. I can honestly tell you that it is out there. Not every person is bad. Not every person is abusive. Like it is out there. It's about knowing ourselves, trusting our guts, believing what people show us, believing the people that they show us to be, but believing in love and playing the game and knowing that you're worth it and you deserve it. And I promise you, there is a love out there that you could not even have dreamt up. You could not even have dreamt up if you tried. It's out there. And but you have to play the game.
One of my mentors, Deborah Smith Pagay, she says, when you're setting boundaries, you build fences and not walls because fences have gates. And so you control who you let in and out of the gate. But if you put the wall up, then nobody can get in.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, two beautiful soundbites of the McConby saying more eloquently put. I think you're absolutely right. I know we only have a short bit of time left, and one of the questions that often pops up is around how do you manage conflict in a healthy relationship? So what can sometimes happen is that you've left the abusive relationship, you've had time, you've now entered into a new relationship, and you're at the moment of conflict. Perhaps you disagree over something really significant, or a world politics, for example, or it might be something of like, what should we have for dinner tonight? But your learned behavior is that this is a scary moment. I need to adapt and keep myself and my children or whomever is in the home, pets safe. How does that look and feel when you're in a healthy relationship? Conflict. Tommy, would you like to have a go at answering first and then BB?
Absolutely. So personally, in my relationship, we talk about fighting fair,
Mhm.
because it's important that you address matters in your relationship, in your home, about all of the areas of your life, especially where there's intersection with one another. And so, what does fighting fair look like? It's not using your words to harm each other. So, we can have a conversation. And also, I am very impassioned. When I'm talking, I'm extremely passionate. So my passion can come off as I'm raising my voice. And what we learned, my husband and I learned as we went through therapy sessions, is no, my passion is not me raising my voice. That's because it's something I believe so deeply. And so I get really full in my words. And so it comes out, it's not soft. And I'm not like, I don't try to shrink in our moments of confrontation, but I also am not trying to harm. And so we've learned to fight fair. We don't use words that harm each other. We absolutely would not use our physical, abilities to harm each other. And also sometimes we realize it's important to step away for a moment, take a cooling off period. So that
Mhm.
way you give yourself time to process. And also in our humanity, we can have words sitting right here on the tip
Mhm.
of our tongue to say that can be harmful.
Mhm.
Step away so you can breathe a moment, and you can, take time to consider, what is it that that's bothering me? Because sometimes the issue at hand is not the matter that's bothering you. And so we've just incorporated all of these tools to put in place so that we don't have to have things unresolved, but that our solutions are helpful and not harmful, because help that doesn't help is not helpful.
Absolutely. I do understand that piece about walking away, and having that cool down time, because I think one of the things, like it's how we married, 20 years now, but one of the things me and my husband will say to each other really nicely is that actually, when I am angry, because everybody gets angry, and when I am angry, respect that anger process by giving me that space to cool down. And I think there is something about acknowledging, it's that piece about knowing yourself. And the words are at the tip of your tongue, is you're so, right about it. But actually, when somebody walks away and says, I need a minute, respect it, because
Mm-hmm.
actually that's healthy to be having that moment where you're knowing the tips of perhaps going to that place where you could say mean and hurtful harmful things, because the truth is we know all of those things about our partners, because when you're in a healthy relationship you share all of those things, so you're aware of it. So I like that. BB, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add two things to that. One, I already shared that or I'm not anymore, but I used to be a runner or an avoider. I would say that it's really important because I would hide behind, I need time. I need to have time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fine, but other people need to solve it. And so I always encourage people to put a time on it. I need 5 minutes, or I need a day, or I need a
That's
week.
good.
Yeah.
It's really important because it makes me, the person who wants to avoid or run, it makes us be accountable to the conversation as well. You have to come back to it. And that other person, if you just give them a reasonable timeline, then that's something that they can gift to you, but also respect. A second thing I would say that's been very helpful for me, and I use it a lot in my practice as well, is letter writing. If there's a big issue or topic and it's too hot or it feels too big to talk about in person, especially because there's interrupting, there's yelling, there's, whatever, write it down. Write it down, read it, reread it, edit it, make sure that your tone is under control, make sure that your language is under control. Don't give it to the person and then sit there while they're reading it and wait. Give them time to absorb it. They can't interrupt you then. They can gather their own feelings about whatever it was. I would encourage them to maybe write it back. My husband and I, and many other people in my life, have done this when it's really, really hard and it just feels like too much to be beneficial in person, like to have an in-person conversation. So that's what I would say about conflict.
Part of me says from what both of you have shared is that actually the conversation about how we manage disagreements should happen when you're in a really happy, healthy moment. You know,
Absolutely.
you're sitting having a good time and sort of saying, actually, when things get really tough, I go quiet. I need you
Mhm.
then to tell me that I can have my time, but you need to give me a time limit so I don't do it. And so you're actually negotiating the healthiest way to have a disagreement and acknowledging that there are everyday disagreements, there are big disagreements, and there are sometimes you need that extra space and time to compromise, and that no healthy relationship exists without any form of disagreement because you're not acting as your independent true selves to some degree. I know we're close to the end of our time, which is so sad because I could chat to you both for hours and hours and hours about this. Um, but I suppose, you know, one of the things that all of our sessions, everything we do, we always try and give something to the friends, family members, and those people that are concerned about somebody who's experienced
Mhm.
domestic abuse. What would you sort of offer up as a way of support for them when they're entering into that new relationship? Tommy, do you want to start?
Mhm. It's important to love them through it,
Mhm.
and to I have another mentor, and she say sometimes you just need to sit and shiver. And the one of the things that you should not do is when someone is in an abusive relationship that you allow for their circumstances to cause you to isolate from them, to pull away from them. Someone, they need to know that there's at least one person that when they're ready and they're prepared to remove themselves from the situation, that they can call that person, and that person is going to work with them in identifying the safety plan and get them in a position so that they can exit out of that relationship safely. But we don't want to isolate them and move to this space where we're giving a weapon to the abuser to further divide and to get that person isolated in a space from other people. And also, they should have some boundaries as well, because it's important to make sure that you're not putting yourself or the people that you care about, in addition to this person, in harm's way. Because sometimes abusive relationships are so volatile that they will hurt any and everybody to make sure that they're able to maintain that control and authority over that person.
Absolutely. And I suppose it echoes into when they're starting that new relationship to do the same, to be a silent, consistent supporter.
Mhm.
And knowing, you know, that whatever happens next, that you're there. And if it happens to not go the way they wanted to, that you'll be as supportive. But I think you're right. You've mentioned something which is so true to that, is that for those that are providing the support, often we feel that our support needs to be endless and it's terrifying. But actually being and
Mhm.
acknowledging how much you can do is really the piece that sets you and that person you're supporting free. And often what we will often say to everyone is that if you can be that bridge to that specialist support service, then you have done something which is life-changing and life-altering. If you are that place where they can come to, pick up the phone, knowing they can have that conversation safely, that's brilliant. If you are able to, you know, hold on to some important documents where it's safe for you to do so,
Mhm.
offering that can be really, really helpful. BB, what are your thoughts?
I would say first and foremost, listen, 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 believe. Don't share. It feels like comparing. If somebody asks, or if it's helpful to, to find like you can relate to somebody, then that's very different. But just listen and believe. And I would say Brene Brown says something in a video that I watched about empathy, and it was like you don't have to have the right answers, you don't have to know what to say. Like you just said, you can get them help to a service or to a professional. But what we can say is something along. She says something along the lines of, "Wow, I don't exactly know what to say right now, but I'm just so glad that you told me." you know? So something where you're acknowledging the significance of it and the heaviness of it. You're saying, I don't have all the answers, but I'm really glad you told me, as in, don't stop, like I'm here. And then, like you said, bridging, helping to bridge to other services or supports that are professional in nature. I always think a really great time to be able to support somebody else is maybe on the way to or just before they're seeking professional help, or right after, so that you can help to kind of like unpack it and understand it and have a discussion about it together. Because oftentimes when you do talk, whether it's to a professional or just somebody who's a little bit of an expert in the field, or let's say you're watching a documentary on it, or watching this show today that we're not a show, but what we're doing today, it can be a lot afterwards, and you can be left feeling like, what now? I've got all these feelings, I've got all these thoughts, and what am I supposed to do with the rest of my day? That's a really good time to offer to be that supportive person, to be able to debrief.
That is incredibly powerful. I'm just thinking of the time you walk in to see your advocate and you walk away with like a file full of forms to fill in, and then a list of things that you need to do in the midst of picking up children, making sure they've got dinner, and having someone who can sit through you, you know, as you talk about even what you've been asked to do can be really, really powerful. So we're just hitting the end of time. We've had, you know, such an incredible session, and I want to thank you both for joining us and also for sharing so much of yourselves. You know, these sessions are interesting, but also really reflective of what our audience is asking for. And I appreciate that you guys have joined us and shared so much. And, you know, one of the things that we really want to do is enable those that have experienced domestic or sexual violence, but domestic violence in this instance, to feel prepared and ready and supported to go out and find the love that they are waiting for and that is waiting for them, that true love, the one that, you know, allows them to grow into this themselves. So as our final sort of statement, I'd like to pass it over to both of you. But just before that, just to let you know, this session will be available on YouTube along with all of our other sessions, and we will keep you up to date with our next series, which will due to start probably in the autumn, looking at the language of love and digging into that. But so I will pass over to you both to say your final comments. Bibi, if you'd like to start, and then Tommy, if you want to finish us out and say goodbye, that would be brilliant. Thank you both.
I would just say to give yourself patience and grace. Just like abusers don't hit or insult or control on the first date, the effects of domestic violence don't end the second that you have escaped or are free. Just like domestic violence takes time and things start really slowly, so much so that you don't even recognize it for what it is. You don't notice what's happening because it's so calculated. It doesn't happen every day or every week or even every month. Healing is the same. Sometimes it's happening, but we don't realize that it's happening. We can be really hard on ourselves that we're not in a better place than we thought we would be at that point in time. But at the end of the day, it is happening. It's different for everybody. And how you're healing when you first come out is going to be very different than 10 years out or 20 years out or whatever else. So really gift yourself patience and grace and just faith that it will, you are healing and it will get better.
And I would share that no matter what stage of the journey in your healing process you're in, even if you're still in an abusive relationship, that every step forward, I don't care if it's a baby step, a huge step, it doesn't matter. The fact is that you're acknowledging where you are and that you desire better. That is progress. And every time you do something that moves you forward, you need to acknowledge that for yourself, to remind yourself you are courageous and that you are worthy of real, authentic love that does not hurt intentionally. Also, that there are people who are cheering you on and who are encouraged by your courage to move forward and pursue the healing that you rightfully deserve. Because we value your life. You were created with purpose, on purpose, and we desire to see you flourish in all aspects of life so you can become a thriving domestic violence survivor and not just surviving and existing, because you deserve real love.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. And thank you for everyone who joined us. I can't say any more to that. You both finished it so beautifully. Thank you.